So learning and development through documentation, this is whereby we can view quite a substantial amount of development, but unless we actually document exactly what we're seeing and when we're seeing it, a lot of it can get lost. So assessment needs to focus on when it's happening at that time, to make a mental note of what you're seeing and then to maybe jot it down when you get a chance in your very busy day. So if we go to focusing on construction rather than reproduction of knowledge, well then we have a better chance of finding where his as Piaget called it, his ZPD, his zone of proximal development. And if we use authentic tasks to engage the children, well then we can demonstrate learning through the documentation, because we can actually see that this learning has had real application. And again, we need time to reflect, we need time to process. So Aistear and observations allow for that time for process, which is very important. Very often curriculums that are inflexible will fire activity after activity after activity at the young brain, and time is needed for that to settle. To move them from one activity into another is a little too fast. So a little bit of time is needed just to give the brain a chance to say, okay, what have I learned? What am I going to retain? And how much of it can I prune away? And then they're ready to move on to the next stage. And that can be done through a process of, So Aistear assessment is always child-led. The documentation records where the child is in terms of his capability. And then gradually the adult's role increases in observations and decreases in the help that's offered. So we're moving out of his zone and we're making sure that he is now taking the reins and he is now in control. And by the way, I just use the word he as a generic term because very often we swing between he and she, but sometimes it's just simpler to stick to the one. So again, assessment can be done by gathering photographs or notes or conversations and examples of the children's work, so that within a year you can see where they started off, the process and the procedure that they took, and where they'll end up at the end of it. And it's also a lovely way to say to the child, well, look how far you've come, this is what you've learned, this is where you started, this is where you're at now, and look what you've been able to achieve. And it's quite a remarkable thing to be able to show a young child that they are a really, really curious learner and that they're a capable learner. Again, like Dunphy said in 2008, and she said that we would focus on the strengths, doing justice to learning. So everything comes from a strengths-based perspective. So assessing social and emotional behaviour is quite similar to making observations. So what we're doing is we're watching, we're listening, and we're using conversation to make sure that we can move the child on in terms of where he's at. For the infants, it's focusing on trusting dispositions, on temperament. For the older children, it's scaffolding attitudes so that we know that we're making sure no biases are coming in, that diversity is being respected, and that other cultures are being recognised. So we're going to try and add to their knowledge, and we're going to create theory of mind or emotional understanding. So it's also learning for adults as well, because it's not the original model of teaching. It's like it is a constructivist theory. It's a co-construction of knowledge. And practitioners understand that that is how we reach such a diverse and rapid brain development in the first year, that just by us flowing information into them isn't enough. It has to be a two-way conversation. The goal is child-initiated emotional regulation, which is brought about by cognitive development. And from that then we can teach empathy. So if we have a picture of what all of this is telling us. And we piece it all together, a bit like the jigsaws that we're very familiar with. It all starts with adults' rich language interactions, which gives us an assessment of temperament, which equals close attachments with key practitioners, which gives us trust, which gives us security, which gives us curiosity, which gives us language, communication and exploration. And then moving then to the early childhood care and education years, we've got language skills, and from that then we can regulate emerging emotions, and from that then we have social and emotional learning, and from that we're moving into using verbal skills and achieving pro-social behaviour for healthy relationships. And then from that we've got self and emotional regulation and empathy for others, which gives us stable future classmate relationships, because remember that the very children that children will meet in preschool will be the same children that they will very likely go through all their primary and maybe secondary and possibly college years. So we have to teach them how to support these relationships. And all of that begins with you, the early years practitioner. So if you're firm in your developmental knowledge and your developmental theory, then the children in your care will have a bright future. Thank you.